doing? They're running us around.
Hey, so for this one, I want to talk about code and coding with LLMs and letting AI write code for you. I'm a developer myself. I'm a web developer. I do front end, which means I do the UI stuff, the user interface stuff, and I work. The last 15 years at least, I've worked on mostly SaaS, software as a service products, which are products that are hosted in the cloud and you access through your web browser, web apps. And, one of the things that I've said in the past is that the kind of common thing across all SaaS products is that they compete on reliability, right? Uptime, mechanisms that function, right? They all do very general purpose things, but the common thing is that you expect them to be there up and working when you need them because they're not installed on your computer. And, that comes down to very talented people who manage and maintain those products, but also the code, right? They need to rely on the code. They need to know the code, right? They need to understand the mechanisms and how things work so that when they break, they know how to fix them. But that's not what I'm saying about LLMs here, right? I'm not going to talk about how LLMs will throw code in there that nobody knows how to fix, right? These are arguments which, there's a lot of shit flying around at the moment about, whether you should just give in and accept that this is the future of coding or not. And what I just wanted to talk about is the trajectory, right? I feel like a lot of developers who are pro LLM coding, generative AI coding, don't really talk about the trajectory, like where it's going. And I just wanted to talk about how, right, you can say, yes, which a lot of them say is, all of this code, generated code, it doesn't really matter if you understand it or not, or they might even say that it does matter if you understand it, right? You need to be able to read it because it goes through what we call a pull request or a merge request, where in the process of code development, you kind of write your code and then you push it to the repository, the code repository, and you request that your colleagues review your code before it is integrated into the production product. And, they talk about how, well, as long as that's being done, then code quality is maintained and we're all happy, right? And everything's fine. And efficiency is gained, right? But I don't want to argue with that. I don't want to argue with the efficiency. I don't want to argue with any of that stuff. It doesn't matter whether I disagree with it or not, because somebody's always going to have a reason. Now, what I wanted to say is you have to think about the trajectory in the sense of, imagine being in that position, right? Where, yes, you start to trust the LLM code enough to let it write big portions or all of a pull request, the code that you're submitting to be accepted into the product. And you start doing that more and more. So firstly, you have to look at that. What has your job become, right? Your whatever ratio you're doing this in, you have to assume that is going to go up if you're trusting that, or if you're finding it to do things that, are helpful to you. Then I think it's important to think about the pull request situation, right? When you push something to be considered by your colleagues, there's a review process, right? It depends on, who you're working with and how careful they are. But they're going to look at that and they're going to accept it, or they're going to reject it, and they're going to add notes, and there's going to be a process, right? And this is all part of the things that are measured in how the processes work and how efficient a team is and all of that, and how skilled a developer is. Now, this is where a lot of the boosters will say, well, you catch things and they get fixed, right? It's not like you can keep using LLMs to just push things without any kind of human intervention. But like I said, this stuff is measured, right? So say that constantly LLM code is rejected and pushed back. You have to see that as the best case scenario, right? Your job has become basically a babysitter for a LLM, But the fact that LLM code is being rejected and not considered high enough quality is an advantage to you, because if LLM code continues to be submitted for consideration and approved and successful, then, as a babysitter, you start to seem very insignificant, right? So what is presented to you there in this trajectory is the option of a LLM babysitter that is hoping that LLMs don't get good enough to not even need babysitting, or that they get good enough and you are essentially constantly proving that they're good enough, right, on the record. So to bring that around to the SaaS product, the reason that I brought that up is like the SaaS products generally just compete on reliability and uptime and functioning mechanisms. You're then in a position where you have to recognize that the people running your company are not really interested in the quality of your code, as in like the artisanship of your code or anything like that, right? Or how elegantly you've written some sort of method or function. They are interested in knowing that the code is not breaking the mechanisms or the uptime, right? So it doesn't really matter where it comes from. And so again, you're hoping that even if the code starts becoming more readily accepted, the LLM generated code becomes readily accepted, and your colleagues don't spot any issues, and there's a trend, right, that it's more acceptable, it's getting better at this. You're still going to be in a situation where you're kind of hoping that it breaks, right? There has to be the positivity behind LLM code has to be limited in a way that the LLM products will not be limited, right? When you say, well, it's not going to do everything, it'll only do these little things where it'll answer my questions about certain functions or certain methods of doing something, you're going to have to say, well, that's where I want to hold it, right? But that's not where the makers of these products want to hold it. They want it to be copy paste code or auto generating code in an AI copilot code editor, right? They want it to be pushing that code out. And so, it's not going to help you to limit the amount that you think it's good, right? Because the push is constant to get to that point where a pull request is made of generated code, and those generated code pull requests are accepted at a high rate, and those pull requests then function properly when they are in production to keep this very general purpose everything app that nobody really knows what it's for and nobody really cares, just to keep it running, right? So like the consequences, it's not like somebody saying, well, this is going to destroy, I don't want to risk bad code creating bad mechanisms that will break my passion project, my thing that I know the world needs, right? I just want this thing that people are paying me for, that I just want this thing that I have, enterprise contracts on, that, all this enterprise money is coming in from. I just want that thing to live up to the service level agreements, right? To be functioning and always online. And if AI generated code achieves that, then let's use more AI generated code. And so, the trajectories I'm trying to present here are, you're either going to be losing your job, right? Because you're not needed anymore. They don't want someone to babysit something that now seems capable of, taking care of itself. And the other side, I don't really want to, call this a dichotomy. This is not, two possible things. This is just like two likely trajectories that I can see. The other side is that you are still there because LLMs are just good enough to need a lot of babysitting and attention. And what was once a very enjoyable and fulfilling job is now a kind of copy paste, just reading something that a machine put out to try to understand what it's doing and to be sure that it's doing something correctly, right? That's not coding. That's something else. And sure, that could be, a future industry, but it's very different. And that needs to be recognized when you're talking to other coders and saying that this stuff is good or it's not so bad, actually, settle down. Just think about the trajectory. Think a little bit forward.